Samoa Joe in TNA was unstoppable, from his legendary undefeated streak in the X Division to classic matches against Kurt Angle. From an infamous pipebomb against Scott Hall to winning the TNA World Heavyweight Championship, the Samoan Submission Machine dominated Impact Wrestling and paved the way for modern, hard-hitting wrestling. He wasn't just another big guy who could move. This was a 280-pound monster who could out-wrestle technical masters, out-brawl hardcore legends, and talk on the mic with actual aura and swagger. Joe brought a legitimacy to TNA that money couldn't buy. So how good was Prime Samoa Joe in TNA actually? How does his Impact Wrestling run stack up against other company legends like AJ Styles, Kurt Angle, and Sting? What were his most brutal rivalries and feuds that defined an entire era of wrestling? Let's revisit the archives and take a deep dive into Prime Samoa Joe in TNA, because what we're about to discover might just remind you why he was called the most dangerous man in wrestling at one point. Joe's TNA journey began at Slammiversary in June 2005, and from the moment he stepped through those ropes, everyone knew they were watching something special. His debut opponent was Sonjay Dutt, and what followed wasn't just a match, it was a statement. Joe destroyed Dutt with a combination of power moves and submission holds that left the Impact Zone crowd stunned. But that was just the appetizer. The 2005 Super X Cup tournament was where Joe first showed his killer instinct. He steamrolled through Sonjay Dutt and Alex Shelley like they were enhancement talent, setting up a finals match against AJ Styles at Sacrifice. When Christopher Daniels interfered and muddied Joe's victory against Styles, it turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It set up a three-way dance at Unbreakable between Joe, Styles, and Daniels that wrestling historians still talk about today. Dave Meltzer gave it 5 stars, and honestly, he could have given it 6. What made that match legendary wasn't just the athleticism, it was the chemistry between all three men. While Styles and Daniels flew around the ring with their high-impact offense, Joe stood in the center like an immovable object, catching both men and turning their momentum against them. Joe's X Division Championship victory over Styles at Turning Point in December was inevitable. His title defenses were masterclasses in different styles of destruction. Against Christopher Daniels at Final Resolution, Joe won by technical knockout, not pinfall, not submission, but by beating Daniels so badly the referee had to stop the match. The three-way rematch at Against All Odds proved Joe's versatility. Even when he lost the X Division title to Daniels in an Ultimate X match, a stipulation designed to protect his streak since there were no pinfalls or submissions, it felt like Joe was playing with his food. By this point, the undefeated streak had taken on a life of its own. 18 months without a pinfall or submission loss, collecting championships, and stacking wins over main event stars. Joe wasn't just the best wrestler in TNA, he was becoming a legit attraction that fans would pay to see just to witness someone try to beat him. But all streaks must end, and when a certain Olympic hero showed up in TNA, Joe was about to face his greatest challenge yet. When Kurt Angle arrived in TNA, the wrestling world was flipped on its head. Joe had been refusing to return Jeff Jarrett's NWA World Heavyweight Championship belt, and TNA management called in Kurt Angle to handle the situation. When Angle stepped into the Impact Zone and confronted Joe face-to-face, the tension was palpable. Here were two legitimate athletes, two completely different fighting philosophies, two legit killing machines, staring each other down like prize fighters. The brawl between Angle and Joe on the episode of Impact is still one of the most talked about segments in the company's history. At Genesis in November, the impossible happened. Kurt Angle made Samoa Joe tap out to the ankle lock, ending the most dominant undefeated streak in TNA history. But here's what made it perfect. Joe didn't look weak in defeat. If anything, the fact that it took Kurt freaking Angle to end the streak made Joe look even more dangerous. What followed was one of the greatest feuds in TNA history. Their trilogy of matches was wrestling perfection. Joe got his revenge at Turning Point, forcing Angle to submit in what felt like poetic justice. Then came the masterpiece, their 30-minute Iron Man match at Final Resolution in January 2007. This wasn't just a wrestling match, it was a war between two masters of their craft. Pro Wrestling Illustrated named it Feud of the Year, and Joe was named as Most Popular Wrestler of the Year for 2006. But Joe was just getting started. In July 2007, he did something unprecedented in TNA history. He won the X Division Championship and then immediately captured the Tag Team Championships by himself at Victory Road's Match of Champions. Joe stood with multiple championship belts, refusing to choose a tag team partner because he didn't need one. The man was a one-person army. His winner-take-all match against Kurt Angle at Hard Justice was the perfect culmination of their feud. 5 championship belts on the line, Joe's X Division and Tag Team titles versus Angle's TNA World Heavyweight and IWGP Heavyweight Championships. But the moment that defined Joe's TNA legacy came at Turning Point in December 2007, and it had nothing to do with what happened in the ring. Scott Hall no-showed Turning Point 2007, where Joe was supposed to team with him and Kevin Nash against the Angle Alliance. Before the match, Joe was asked to cut a simple promo introducing Eric Young as Hall's replacement. Instead, what happened next changed the course of TNA forever. Joe went completely off script for 5 minutes, unleashing a pipe bomb, 4 years before CM Punk. He buried Scott Hall for his unprofessionalism, called out Kevin Nash for his attitude, and took shots at TNA management for enabling mediocrity. Joe praised TNA originals like Eric Young, the Motor City Machine Guns, Jay Lethal, and others, while simultaneously burying ex-WWE wrestlers like Kurt Angle and Nash. This wasn't a worked promo. This was a frustrated wrestler speaking his truth. Joe had crossed lines that weren't supposed to be crossed, said things that weren't supposed to be said, and made everyone in the back genuinely uncomfortable. Kevin Nash was legitimately angry, Dixie Carter was furious, and fans were watching the fourth wall completely crumble. The whole controversy was eventually turned into a storyline where Joe directed his frustrations toward TNA management, but everyone knew the truth. Samoa Joe had shown he was willing to sacrifice his own career to call out the BS that was holding the company back. By early 2008, Joe had proven he could out-wrestle Kurt Angle. He could carry multiple championships simultaneously, and he could speak uncomfortable truths that other wrestlers were afraid to voice. He wasn't just TNA's most dangerous performer, he was their most honest one, and that honesty was about to earn him the biggest prize in the company. At Lockdown in April 2008, Joe faced Kurt Angle in the ultimate career-defining match. Not only was the title on the line, but if Joe lost, his career was over. What followed was arguably one of the greatest matches in TNA history. Joe and Angle went to war inside that steel cage and put on a classic that's still revisited to this day. When Joe finally defeated Angle and became world champion, it was vindication for everything he'd built over 3 years in TNA. The Wrestling Observer newsletter called this match arguably the company's peak in terms of creative, match quality, and production. Joe had reached the mountaintop, and TNA had their perfect champion. His title reign showcased everything that made Joe special. At Sacrifice in May, he destroyed Kaz and Scott Steiner in a 3-way match, proving he could handle multiple opponents without breaking a sweat. The King of the Mountain match at Slammiversary was even more impressive. Joe retained against Booker T, Christian Cage, Rhino, and Robert Roode in TNA's signature multi-man contest. His steel cage weapons match against Booker T at Hard Justice was pure brutality. The 3-way match at No Surrender against Christian Cage and Kurt Angle was the perfect showcase for champion Joe, proving he belonged in the main event with wrestling's biggest stars. His confidence was infectious, his dominance was complete, and his 182-day reign felt like it was just getting started. Then came Bound for Glory in October 2008, and everything collapsed. During his title defense against Sting, Joe attempted a dropkick from the press box area. What should have been a routine, high-impact move turned into a nightmare when Joe landed back first on concrete stairs. The impact was devastating, and everyone watching knew something was seriously wrong. Joe lost the match and the championship that night, but more importantly, he lost something that couldn't be replaced: his physical peak. The Wrestling Observer newsletter later reported that Joe was never the same after that bump. His work noticeably slowed down, he gained weight, and his standing as a main event star in the company entered a downward spiral from 2009 on and never recovered. It was a cruel irony. Joe had finally reached the top of the mountain. He had proven he could carry TNA as world champion, but one miscalculated move on the biggest stage changed the trajectory of his entire career. The king had fallen, and he would never quite climb back to those heights again. After this, Joe would go on to have more classics in TNA against the likes of Styles, Abyss, Jeff Hardy, and Daniels. He would eventually join WWE, dominate NXT, have hard-hitting bouts against the likes of Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns, before eventually signing with AEW. Today, Samoa Joe is a respected veteran. He is a legitimate tough guy and one of the most believable wrestlers of the modern era. But his incredible 3-year run in TNA from 2005 to 2008 was what established his legacy as one of wrestling's most dominant forces. While WWE had their sports entertainment spectacle, TNA had Samoa Joe choking people unconscious and making it look effortless. His muscle buster was a death sentence. His coquina clutch put people to sleep, and his unmatched intensity made every match feel like a legit fight. From his legendary undefeated streak to his classic trilogy with Kurt Angle. From his infamous shoot promo against Scott Hall to his dominant world championship reign, Joe gave TNA real intensity that couldn't be replicated. When Samoa Joe walked into the Impact Zone, it turned into his nation of violence.